What any questions or observations? Very keen to hear. Yes, Lindsay.
Thanks very much, Godfrey. That's fascinating. And I like to think that being below the radar, as you were saying, with some of the bigger players is sometimes an advantage, actually, but good luck in that. Well, my question for you is when you see EVs advertised or want to get a check on them, they do talk about the state of health of the battery as an EV part of the EV reporting. Can you comment on where that sort of process sits in relation to what you're dealing with here?
Uh, at a high level, I'd say they're not reliable. I mean, you've got Tesla, who probably the experts in batteries, so you'd want to be more careful about what you say about their technology. But really, I'd ask Jonathan if you want to comment on that one, Jonathan, because it's quite a good question. It is a very good question.
Yeah, sure. Um, Look, the extent which that doesn't work is probably described by saying, have you ever had that instance where your laptop says it's got 40% of its charge left and then suddenly it goes flat on you? And That's because they're wildly lying. That's the short answer. And you can see it if you watch the charge state of your phone. It doesn't discharge smoothly, even though you know it's flattening the battery smoothly. The estimates are all over the place, but how do you know they're not right? I mean, how could you tell if your laptop's telling you a lie or your phone is more charged than it says or less charged? Um, and so Anybody who really has to work closely with the battery soon discovers that the state of charge and state of health aren't reported very accurately. There's actually a page on Tesla's website which says if your car becomes confused about its range, here is what you do. And there's a great long list of instructions, which, trust me, your aunt could not possibly execute by herself. And at the bottom it says, and if doing all of this doesn't work, do it again. So it's essentially to acknowledge the fact that their battery management systems can lose the plot, basically. I'm now fascinated with this, so I watch everything. I think my Razor is the worst liar. It has three little LEDs, and it spends most of its time with three LEDs on. Then after a while, I get two LEDs, and then after about two more shaves, it just goes flat.
Yeah.
They can't even get a razor right.
Yeah. Thank,
um, we
thank you,
can.
Jonathan. Thank you very much. I think Jeff's got another question, unless you had something more to add, Jonathan.
No, no, no. They
Yeah,
really just
yeah,
they're much worse than you think.
yeah. Thanks for the question, Lindsay. Jeff, what would you like?
Yeah, it seems to me that the way you've tackled this to build an analog model of it, independent completely of what the battery is made of. Is that right? Does this apply to all batteries, however they're made, and
I
whatever is
wish
likely to come in the future?
I wish they were true.
No.
No, we've been concentrating lithium ion, and I'll let Jonathan comment on this as well. But and no, they have done some other tests on other batteries. And sure, when you hear me explain the Phuket equation, I think I can absolutely understand where you're coming from, Jeff. But it's a good question. Jonathan, do you want to comment on that?
Um, well, I think the reason we brought up Pickett's equation was that people have been using it for 120 years. We actually managed to prove it. We got a theoretical proof as to what, and he got it right. Puckett got the equation exactly right, purely empirically. Um, and so we're kind of proud of that. It says, "Oh my God, the stuff we're doing is, it's theoretically sound." Um, but that's not very useful, right? Because we've still got the equation. I do note in the chat, Steve says, "What's the criterion for the transition of battery from a poor state of health to death. And complicated answer exists, but the short one is pretty much to date, lithium batteries haven't been around long enough for anybody to do anything except notice when they reach the fail criterion that the company gave you for the warranty. So Tesla say, look, if your car range contracts to 70% in the warranty period, we'll give you a new battery. And that's saying, oh, well, it's the capacity of the battery that reflects its health. But that really isn't the case. And the quintessential counterexample is the original Tesla Roadsters, many of which are still on the road, still have a reasonable range, but can barely accelerate to 40 miles an hour because the impedance of the batteries got much higher. And that makes them nearly useless, but they wouldn't, I mean, the warranties run out, but they wouldn't have failed the warranty on that. So there's much more to battery state of health than just the capacity of the battery. And everything you've got, your phone, your laptop, your EV, is essentially trying to measure the capacity. And all it does is it says one morning, oh, look, we're fully charged. Let's start counting the charge. And it looks at the current going out of the battery and it gets to flat and it goes, bingo, now I know what the capacity of the battery is. And every time it gets that opportunity, it does a capacity measurement. Maybe it does a little extrapolate guess if it thinks you're supposed to be 80% flat and you're actually 90% flat. It says, oh, my estimate's a bit out. But that's why they drop the ball, because that's a lousy way of doing it. And it's also very difficult. If you manage your batteries properly, you probably never charge it all the way up to the top. Advice is don't charge your Tesla past 80% unless you have to. And don't ever let it go flat. Of course, you're not going to let it go flat. You'd be stranded in, halfway out of town and in trouble. So you never hit the top and the bottom, which is why the thing gets confused about what the capacity of the battery is. And so you get some number, it's in your phone, it's in your laptop, it's in your car, but it's probably wrong. But you can't tell that it's wrong until one day it's catastrophically wrong. Does that answer your question, Steve? Yeah, good. Okay. You want to go, Godfrey?
No. I'm waiting for more questions. That's you've
Can I ask a question, Godfrey? It's Stuart.
absolutely, Stuart.
I see what you're doing. It's a brilliant idea. In my language, I would use that you're maximizing your investment. And I think maximizing the investment is the thing that really matters here. I have a similar problem with my shaver, and my laptop's pretty well behaved, but it's irrelevant for those batteries. Where you've approached it is you've gone in at the larger battery end, which I think is absolutely right, because having been involved in running a 3 megawatt battery for grid support. What you could do within your software, because you'll have particular equations to look at what you're actually doing, what you don't want to do, and I think the real benefit of what you're doing is that if you could extend the life of these, as you say, $100 million batteries, by a significant amount, that's where your real key is. That's where your money is going to come from. That's where the kudos and everything else is going to be absolutely there. Because as you said before at the beginning, there's some very large batteries out there now for grid support all around the world, Chinese, put massive quantities in. So if you can claim through the systems that you're putting in, that you can extend the life of the battery, that's worth mega bucks. And I heard you talk about flow batteries as well. I think they're a sort of coming technology. They're not there yet, but there's a coming technology, and it seems to be something you can upscale very, very quickly, which could be extremely appropriate for very large grid installations. So that would be very interesting. Very, very interesting talk, and thank you very much. Yeah, wish you every success with it.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah. Yeah, your points are very 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 relevant. The only thing I'd say is the discussions we've had, which are early, with the Infotech guys that run the battery plant, is that there are several other factors. I mean, cell rebalancing. For those of us who are familiar with batteries, my brother was asking me as a result of my invitation to him tonight. He was saying, "Well, I've got a battery, a big torch, and the thing doesn't work. And yet, when I test my battery, he's a physicist. He tests batteries. The three of them are fine, and one of them's bad." So, of course, that's series, and in parallel things work differently. But either way, you have to balance. And if you've got one battery not working properly with the other, then you're also running inefficiently. So there's several other factors. I mean, clearly the length of the lifetime of battery is critical, and that's worth millions. I totally agree with you, 110%. Can't do that. Shouldn't say that as an engineer.
Well, the big batteries, Godfrey, as far as I'm concerned, is the big batteries. They control each cell.
Yes,
I might be wrong,
correct.
but that was my impression.
Yes, they control each cell, but they still need to balance them, evidently.
Of course, yes, yes.
And so to balance them, they have to turn some of them off while they recharge them or do other things. When I say turn them off, I don't quite know what they do, but they have to make the whole battery less efficient. And so the efficiency suffers. And I'd be interested if Matt's still here to hear his comments about that. But he was having dinner, so he's probably moved on.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, Godfrey. The last one, which is, quote, have you looked at the innards of the batteries that are failing to find out, which bit of the model represents the bit that's failing? No, we've asked for funding to do that, but we didn't get anywhere. It's going to be an expensive exercise. I think that is the most fundamentally important thing for the battery people, but no funding to do that. So that was a short answer to that question. Another question here from John is the third part of the battery puzzle is how to optimally charge. What insight do we get from that? We haven't really got any insight that we've found things and then discovered that other people had found them as well. We haven't been doing this long enough, basically. In fact, we're really only going to believe that this works brilliantly when we've been doing it long enough for batteries to actually wear out. And some of the modern ones are rather good, and the bastards take 5 to 10 years to wear out. So we're not actually going to have complete proof until the end of that. But we do anticipate. So one of the little lines we like to drop is if you had our system, you could tell what the damage to your battery was of loaning your car to your nephew or your lead-footed aunt, because we would be able to see declines in battery health over a short space. If the battery health is moving down smoothly, but if it's got a little hick in it, you go, what the hell happened on the 12th of July? Oh my God, I loaned my car to Gladys, so I'm not going to do that again. But we've got that degree of precision available to us.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hugh, before I ask Lindsay again, because Hugh hasn't had a turn, so do you want to ask a question, Hugh?
Well, I don't think I came anywhere near understanding the impedance frequency diagram. Does that mean, because the frequencies were extremely low, seem to take a heck of a long time. We're used to 50 hertz, and all of a sudden we're talking about not 50 times a second, but once a day or so.
Exactly, exactly. No,
And
you've got it. This is the difference where no one else has been before.
does this mean that and it looked like impedance went away up when the frequency went away down? And so does this mean that um, if you cycle your battery very slowly, you get a high impedance, or have I got that completely wrong?
I'm going to ask Jonathan
Yeah,
again.
no, it turns out if you charge your battery up, say, let's say you charge your car battery. I'm talking in the old lead acid days. You charge your car battery up and you get a certain measurement of capacity. If you charge it up and you keep it on the charger for another week, you'll get a much bigger capacity. Something happened while you sat there doing nothing for a week. And that's true to a lesser extent for lithium batteries. And in fact, it gets worse. The older the battery gets, the more it will need to sit float charging in order to deliver the capacity that it has. So you can have an illusion. If you make the capacity measurement test straight away after charging, you'll get a smaller number than if you leave it floating overnight or for 3 days. And the older the battery gets, the greater that extent happens. Hence the old Tesla Roadsters that, you know, to charge and allow to get up to full speed. Um, so yeah, it's a messy, complicated thing, which the computer in your car should take care of it. But yes, it's a messy, complicated thing. All to do with fractional integrals, fractional calculus, which is not taught even in undergraduate mathematics yet. It will be. It's become very, very much a mathematics of the thing in the last 20 years. So when mathematicians get their act together and modernize their maths degrees, suddenly fractional calculus will be in probably second or third year undergraduate math, but it isn't yet.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Hugh, is that?
Can I chip in here, Godfrey?
Yes. Is that Chris?
Yes, yeah. Jonathan, just going back to Jonathan, the reason we started, or Jonathan started, and then I came on board shortly afterwards, but the reason we make these measurements, these kinds of frequencies, one of the reasons is because these frequencies reflect the frequencies at which batteries typically are charged and discharged. You charge your cell phone battery and discharge it over a 24-hour cycle. And these frequencies reflect this kind of charging and discharging frequencies. And at these frequencies, just putting it very simply, measuring at these frequencies, we're able to discern impedance and phase behaviors that aren't evident at higher frequencies, and these phenomena change as the battery ages. And we also there's impedance and phase phenomena that change. Yeah, so they change as the battery ages. And I was going to say something else, and it's gone.
Jonathan, I'll introduce you while you think, and then
okay.
After we have Chris, I'll go to Lindsay because he's got his hand up there. But I'll introduce Chris because he's a particularly interesting person. He started his life as a pharmacologist and then went on to be a technical writer. And because he liked electronics, he did a PhD. He's a Dr. Blooming Chris Wood, PhD with Jonathan Scott on this battery project. So, I mean, I don't know very many people who've done that. Chris, have you thought of what the other point was?
No, I can't remember what the other thing was. So the chief thing was that we were able to see. Oh, I've got it. Okay, so the classical way that you measure and characterize a battery, this is what the electrochemists do, is they measure the impedance of the battery. They measure impedance phenomena of the battery at much, much higher frequencies than we do. And they usually use very expensive impedance meters to do this. We use equipment that I think we picked up off Trade Me for a few $100, source measurement units and homegrown software. And the old way of measuring and characterizing batteries using electrochemical impedance spectroscopy gave us, over the years, battery models that have attempted to model the individual chemical components of the battery. So you have an equivalent circuit model for the separator and an equivalent circuit model for the electrolyte, and you have an equivalent circuit model for the anode and another one for the cathode. And I've seen equivalent circuit models that presumably have been used to inform the creation of battery management systems that are based on up to 9 components. Well, these are excessively complicated, and they're not really much help because we know that these battery management systems are lying to us. So what we have found with the work started by Jonathan and using the techniques that he developed is that we are able to use these very low frequency impedance phenomena measurements, tracking impedance and phase as the battery ages. We're also able to use this to relate back to the theory that the guys are working on at the moment to create much, much simpler equivalent circuit models that appear, as far as we can tell, although, we need to research this further because we're not there yet. We can create, we feel, much simpler equivalent circuit models that could go into battery management systems that would actually tell us the truth. So the current paradigm doesn't really work very well. And I think we carry on using it because the industry says, oh, well, this is good enough because it's a rough idea of how much life is left in your battery. But I mean, if it's getting in the way of sort of like secondhand EV sales, for instance, or something like, because nobody wants to buy a secondhand EV because they're not sure, the battery management system is only as good as the underlying theory that went, the battery model that's in the head of the battery management system. And if that model's no good, we feel that the way we're measuring these batteries gives us a much more equivalent circuit model that can tell us the truth about what is really going on. And this has huge implications for things like that, for things that people might want to spend a significant amount of money on, like a used electric vehicle.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Well, Lindsay's had his hand up for ages.
Yes, that's exactly who I wanted to get.
That's fine. It's been very interesting, even though a lot of it's above my head. Thank you. In fact, what's happened though, something Jonathan said triggered a second quick question. But my main question was whether your system has a role to play in the future of things like vehicle to grid and vehicle to building interfaces, which have been talked about for many years, but haven't really materialized greatly. So that's the real question. But my question for you, Jonathan, is what on earth would Gladys do to an EV to suddenly plunge the battery health?
Well, as it happens, if you were a follower of one of these YouTube channels where they are preoccupied with running commercial vehicles across the quarter mile, you'd find that a brand new Tesla just beats the pants off just about anything else. Sometimes, however, they lose. And I'm only guessing, because we haven't got our hands on expensive cars yet, and we're still doing this, but I'm guessing that planting your foot ages a battery at a highly accelerated rate, let's say. We know on a bench, if you cycle a battery up in an hour and down in an hour and up in an hour, it wears out pretty quickly, maybe 500 cycles. If you go up over 4 hours, hang about for a bit, go down over 4 hours, etc., you get a whole lot more cycles out of it. Batteries don't like to be thrashed. And about 1 hour from full to empty is the edge where you go from I'm pretty happy to I really don't like this. So you get your pocket calculator out and you find out if you sit there in your Tesla on the drag strip and you ram your foot down on the accelerator. 10 seconds later, the thing's doing, 150 kilometers an hour and it's covered a quarter mile. You can only you can't do that for very long. It's discharging the battery well above the 1 hour rate, right? If you could do that continuously and you had a huge, great straight track, your battery would be dead in a quarter of an hour. So we're pretty sure that drag racing the car is not good. And so if you're thinking of buying an EV, I would advise that you buy the long range version, even if you don't wish to drive long range, because the power that you use when you accelerate the car is divided amongst more batteries in the long range version. And so it is going to suffer less when your son borrows it and thrashes it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, well done. That was the answer that Jesse Mulligan asked me. He asked me, which I couldn't answer. He said, "Well, have you got any advice to the practical person?" And I thought, for God's sake, I've been working on power stations and pacemakers, not the practical person. But you've answered it perfectly. Who's else got their hand up? Peter.
Yeah, I just had a side issue. We're using batteries more and more. And it'd be good if we can recover most of the materials from these batteries and use them again rather than it just going to waste. So I wonder whether that's something you look at when you look at these battery designs. Just a side issue, we've got a Nissan Leaf and it's now down to 70 kilometers range. So be good to know whether you look at how to make batteries where you can recover most of the material and use it again, because as we make more and more batteries, we're going to be using more and more material. So we don't really want all the lithium to end up in rubbish dumps and so on. Yeah.
Haven't got an answer for that, Peter, but what I do know is one of the Tesla founders has split off and has poured all his millions of dollars into Redwood. It's called Redwood, and they are totally focused on recycling batteries because he recognized that we're going into the age of batteries and we need to work on that. But I'm not sure that our technology will help on that, except that I believe we're all going to become battery experts, and so this is part of the big picture for which we have to be interested. And certainly, if we're engineers for social responsibility, we certainly are interested in that subject. I think Stefan Hubeck had his hand up. Are you there, Stefan?
Jeff first, because I may go a little bit away from the main core topic of this talk.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Jeff. You're on mute, Jeff.
Just briefly, when you're looking for funds or sister universities and so on, since China is by far the world's biggest manufacturer of electric vehicles, have you looked at possibly finding a sister university or sister projects in China?
I've got some ambivalence on that, Jeff. China also has a reputation of not honoring its IP, intellectual property obligations. I think things are changing much more. It was bad 10 years ago. It's probably not as good 5 years ago, and it's probably getting better now. But to be honest, I think we've got so many potential collaborators around, whether they be universities or industrial. And to be honest, I think at the moment where I sit, I'm a bit biased because I am in the commercial arena. I would value a commercial partner more than a university partner at this stage, because commercial partners have more discretionary money to spend, and they're not all huge organizations that require a whole lot of approval levels, etc., etc., etc. So that's my answer to you on that one. Is that satisfactory? At some
I
point.
noticed there's a question in the chat.
Oh, yes.
As the underlying theory of extra low frequency measurements,
Which
etc.
one are you referring to?
It's Chris Dunn to everyone,
Oh, right.
I think, and we started this work with lead acid and moved into lithium. So look, lead acid it's a thorny question, and the reason is this: in a lithium battery, the electrolyte is inert. Lithium ions hop from one plate to the other through generally a hydrocarbon liquid. It doesn't react. It's inert. It reacts if you turn it loose, but it's not changing in the battery. Lead acid is different. You start with a high concentration of sulfuric acid. As the battery goes flat, you wind up with water in the electrolyte. Atoms are moving from the electrolyte onto a plate and back again when you recharge the battery. And the problem with that scheme is that you're essentially dismantling the plate and building it again every time you recharge the battery. And that causes enormous noise, variation, charge to charge. And so you face a problem with lead acid batteries that the results are very noisy. And it's not clear yet whether we will be able to pull this off on account of that noise. But the theory holds. The mechanism that we apply is different in detail, but the same theory sits there, and you learn stuff by making measurements down at the ultra low frequencies, which is, of course, the frequency. I know people who charge their EVs about once a fortnight, and that's around about 1 microhertz. So the impedance right down the bottom there is crucial to what the behavior of the vehicle is. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Jonathan. Stefan, are you ready for your slightly off-track question?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Godfrey. So yes, a very good presentation, very interesting technology, very interesting topic. It's just that for me, the most interesting slide you showed was the one about the build out of battery capacity in New Zealand that is planned. And this is more a question to all of the floor here rather than just to you, because I couldn't help noticing that if we aggregate the numbers on your slide there, we're talking about 1,000 gigawatt of 1,000 megawatt of battery capacity. And New Zealand's highest electricity demand was in winter 2021, 7,250 megawatts. So we're talking about 12, 13, 14% of the maximum power that the grid has. And as you said in your reply to that written question, available only for 1, 2, or 3 hours. Now, if this investment would be made by the lines companies, I could see, some reason why this would be happening. But all of the big names you had up there on the slide were the gentailers, the generator retailers. Also, the chunks of battery in 100 megawatt ranges mean that these won't be distributed batteries. They will have to be located at a GXP. Now, the real question is, what is the end game here for the gentailers if they are the investors in all of this? Because in the end, delivering power at a GXP is what their hydros could do all the time for 1 or 2 hours. So, to turn this a little bit around, it almost sounds like McDonald's has a network of outlets that are 70% utilized, and instead of ramping them up and down more, they're buying a Burger King chain for twice the price of their current investment to basically have more standing capacity that's even less utilized. So I can't, from a financial point of view, not really see why the gentailer of all the players in the electricity market would be interested in going for this space. So Transpower would have a much higher interest. The alliance companies certainly would benefit from all this. So why is it exactly the people that seem to be able to benefit least of all that are at the forefront of these investments?
Okay, all right. Well, that's a big question. I'll start firstly to say that start with the easy answer. Transpower is the grid operator. It cannot invest in any generation at all. It can buy rights to generate off other people at odd times. That's what it does. It buys certificates and whatever. But coming back to the main issue which you're identifying, is why is it the big generators, not the distributors? Um, there's. Are you going, Jonathan?
Yes, I've got to go.
Yeah.
Run out of time.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. So the Gentiles have got huge balance sheets, so that's one reason. But the other reason is that as we are ruling out the power station, for example, Genesis has got Huntley, and one of it can run. They invested, I don't know, 100 million or whatever to change it from coal to coal or gas. Then they're now putting a battery beside it. And so they are trying to say, look, as we move along the growth path, because more and more electricity is going to be needed, there's no question that more electricity is going to be needed. The cheaper forms of electricity and the best ones for New Zealand's environment are going to be environmentally friendly, and therefore solar power, and therefore wind power, and therefore they have high amounts of variability. So in contrast to what you're saying, I felt that this makes huge sense to them, because they have to be able to turn the batteries on instantaneously, and sometimes for as much as an hour, maybe less. And furthermore, most of the hydro generation is down the South Island, but most of the usage is in the North Island. So that's where we need more generation or more batteries. The other part of the answer is yes, sure. The network companies, well, for example, the first and only battery company in New Zealand, battery generator in New Zealand, is owned by a network company. And then there's the debate about whether the battery should go before or after the electric meter. And that's another very interesting subject. I have solar power, I have a battery, and so I'm able to offset at not a very good price, I have to say, and that's where regulation and government comes in. So all these points that you make, Stefan, are very much good questions, but no simple answers.
That
Stefan,
was a good answer, Godfrey, to a hard question.
yeah, it was a hard question. Thank you.
I'm not an electrical engineer, and it's all mostly gone way above my head. But I think my simple answer to that previous question was that the generators are just in it to make money. And if you've got a hydro power scheme that can deliver, say, 24 megawatts or whatever, and you can have a set of batteries that you can charge up when the spot price is low, you charge the batteries up when it's low, and when the spot price goes up, you discharge those batteries. That's why the generators are doing it.
Very good answer too. It's a raft of good answers like that all package up and make the electricity system. The New Zealand is considered as having one of the best electricity systems. We might be surprised at that, and certainly as consumers and environmentalists and as engineers for social responsibility, we shouldn't let that go unquestioned because there are lots of questions in there that need to be scrutinized. And Stefan's quite right at scrutinizing those issues. So I'm very much in favor, I really enjoy this presentation because you guys are stretching me with all sorts of issues and questions. I asked my old oh, I should look at the chat, by the way. I haven't looked at all the chat, but just before I do, I asked my old Schlumberger colleague whether he had any comments from his perspective as a gas plant owner, because I'm fascinated by someone who owns gas fields being interested in batteries. And I mean, I think it's a sign of where we're going, actually. So, Mark, I see you've taken your microphone off. That's excellent.
Yeah, I'm Godfrey. Thanks for putting me on the spot. I've put a brief comment in the chat line to explain what we're doing. My company has a share of a power station which generates electricity from the gas that we produce in southern Spain. We are looking at installing a PV project, the 5 megawatt PV project, alongside the power station. But the economics of that only work if we can store the PV energy in batteries when the price during the day in Spain on the market can go down to zero euros per megawatt hour. But then at 9 p.m. at night, it goes up to 200 euros per megawatt hour.
Oh my gosh.
There is a fantastic arbitrage opportunity here. But also we could use the electricity that we generate from our natural gas production. We could also store that. And we then have a fully hybridized project between gas power and solar power. And then we could then, what we're interested in doing is investing into the arbitrage between the within-day swing of prices, which in Spain is extreme because Spain has high PV and has high wind. But what we're finding is in the middle of the day, we switch our gas power station off, and at night we are generating electricity at 200 euros per megawatt hour. It's a completely extreme range of arbitrage. So that's why my company is looking at battery energy storage systems.
Fascinating. And I mean, this is a trend that's happening worldwide because what Mark has just described happens to a lesser or greater extent wherever you are in the world. And I mean, where in Australia, of course, they've got lots of sun and lots of coal. And, anyhow, look, the subject could go on forever. It's an amazing subject.
But what this has informed me is that as a customer for buying a battery energy storage system, I have to leave the battery management system to the vendor because we don't understand that. Okay. What this has informed me is that battery management systems are far from exact. And I didn't know that. I thought the vendors knew all about it, and it seemed that they don't. So this is very, very informative.
Thank you. Well, thank you for saying that because that is absolutely at the heart of what our small New Zealand backwater research team has discovered.
Can I
Good
just
stuff.
chip in very briefly? Out of interest, today's grid in New Zealand has ranged between $32 up to over $300 in a 24-hour period. So we've got maybe not down to zero, but we've got a range comparable to what you were just talking about there.
Exactly. And hence, I think that explains part of my explanation to Stefan Hubik, who there is arbitrage, real significant arbitrage to be made. And arbitrage, I have to say, arbitrage is a bit of a pejorative term. People make it sound as if it's only traders and, Swifties who make money, but it's actually getting the market to operate properly. And we should. Oh, I can see Thomas saying no. Oh, well, we've got a debate there. Yeah, but I mean, it certainly contributes to making the battery. Maybe it doesn't make it work as good as it should, but it does contribute.
We're in a phase at the moment, and Stuart here, we're in a phase at the moment where we don't have enough batteries to balance the solar and wind that's available. And this is so for certainly the UK and America. But they're doing all they can to bring it up. And those figures that have been quoted tonight are the very reason. Those figures that have been quoted are also the reason why your technology could be so valuable for those batteries. I would, if I was buying batteries now, I would actually. I know some of you probably won't like it, but I would go for Tesla because the battery management system, the clever bit, is actually the cleverest. And we had a fire recently in the States, you might have seen, LG Chem, the third largest battery in the world, up in flames, totally ruined, because they didn't have the control right. And that hasn't happened to Tesla.
Oh, that's interesting. I must research that. Thank you, Stuart. LG Chem.
But when you're looking at using the prices vary so quickly that what you're doing is you're having to drop your power from your battery very quickly, and this is money in the bank for you, Geoffrey, with your technology, because it's minimizing the damage to the battery in those states of very, very large states of change, which have to happen because the prices are so enormous that you're trying to chase.
Yep. Oh, it's an exciting time to be doing this work, and what else can I say? Are there any other? I've got Chris here. Jonathan's left. Chris is still here, and Margaret.
Godfrey Peters put a question in the chat there. I don't know whether you've seen it.
Oh, look, thank you for that.
Yeah,
how is comparing knowledge? So, Peter Orenshaw. Oh well, why don't you? Could you verbalize it for me rather than me having to read it?
Well, okay. Is Peter there?
Yes, he's here. So why don't we get him to talk to us?
Took a while to unmute myself. Yeah, it's just this outfit called Flip the Fleet, which you may or may not have heard of, that gather data on Nissan Leafs. Found that in fact the condition of batteries was least related to number of cycles and most related to simple calendar aging of the batteries, of lithium batteries, and this is completely different to lead acid chemistries. For instance, some of the best ones were taxis that were not thrashed in like having lead feet, but used heavily and had high kilometers on them, but they still had good batteries for their age. So it's and of course, if they've got high kilometers, that means they've had high numbers of charge cycling. So I'd question
Jonathan's claim that
using our knowledge from lead acid batteries for to assume the same things will be true for different chemistries. Might not be at all.
I don't think Jonathan. Well,
no, Jonathan's gone. I might be able to.
Yeah, I know. But what Jonathan said was that some of the theory could be applied, but they're quite different. Lead acid is very, very different. Chris, do you want to speak to that? Yeah, I didn't think that he was saying the theory would apply to lead acid. In fact, I thought he was saying the reverse.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, I've got to be careful what I say here because I haven't been directly involved with the group since I finished my PhD about 18 months ago. I've just been sitting on the sidelines watching what's been going on. So I'm not directly associated with the university. I'm just keeping in touch with the group. However, when I finished my
That'll
PhD,
change if I've got anything to do with it.
Thank you. The situation when I finished my PhD was that the general principles underlying the battery modeling process and measuring process that we were using was potentially, theoretically, chemistry agnostic, applicable to, but for each battery type, the way I saw it, you would have to have a reference set of measurements, okay, for each individual battery type. So you don't see, you see the same impedance and you see impedance and phase behavior with every different type of battery. You won't see the same impedance and phase behavior for every battery chemistry and every battery type. That will change. But that's why, so for each battery type, the way I saw it, you would have to have a reference battery, which will be your sort of like your benchmark for your battery management system. That's what your battery management system will be measuring against. This is my reference battery. This is how I expect it to age over time. This is what I expect to happen to the impedance and phase as the battery ages. There's one thing there that Peter said, which Jonathan has been saying for years, is that cycle counting doesn't work. So we suspect that many battery management systems fitted in many devices at the moment actually do depend on cycle counting, which is not accurate. And what Peter says there is very, very pertinent because it just goes to show, and I am familiar with Flip the Fleet, I have seen it, it's very interesting information on there. So that really, that ties in with Jonathan's assertion that he's been making for many years that cycle counting doesn't work. And the other thing that the battery modeling group has been trying to do has been trying to using these fractional modeling techniques based on constant phase elements, where you're able to introduce the way a battery ages is, we know, partly dependent on the way the battery has been used in the past. So the battery has a history and that influences its future aging. And the guys at the moment are trying to refine ways that they can actually model this, that you can build into the fractional model the effects of the battery's history. Now, this is all a little bit because I'm not directly involved with the battery modeling. I was more the measurement man, and the mathematical modeling has proceeded apace since I left the university. But this was one of the ideas that we're trying to build into the battery model. It's the idea that you can build in the effect of the battery's history of use on its future behavior and on its state of health when predicting when it's likely to fail. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Jeff, may I remind you it is past 9 o'clock now, and we usually knock off after an hour or 1 hour 15. And I think we can talk until tomorrow or whenever cows come home in the Waikato. But perhaps at some stage we should think of an ending of this.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to check with any other people if they had any questions. I wonder if my other colleague, not my technical colleague, Professor Margaret Toledano, has anything, but she's saying no. She's part of the team to help us get the message out. And whether my old very senior scientist Keith Sharrock has got any comments, Gabby was a student working for us about a year or two ago. Any comments from her at all? Gabby Dumble, Keith Sharrock, or Liam from university? So if there isn't, I hand it back to you, Jeff, and you can call it a day, a night.
Well, thank you very much, Godfrey, and getting your team to come. This has been a very fascinating presentation, and it set a very high standard for this year. And I'm looking forward to many more of them. Thank you, everyone. And Chris, good to see you, Chris. Done.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to see you too.
Okay, well, and thank you all for coming, and especially those from the other side of the world.
Thank you.